Well, new today from Capitol Hill, Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson narrowly secured his title as the 56th Speaker of the House after a delayed vote in House chambers. Colin Vidros joins me now in the studio with more. Colin, how did we get to this point?
Well, Johnny, the U.S. Constitution requires the House of Representatives to elect a Speaker of the House before lawmakers pass bills. And today, Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson was voted by House members to remain House Speaker for the 119th Congress, which had its first day on Capitol Hill.
Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 119th Congress.
A momentous vote to secure the Speaker role once again took place on the House floor as the 119th Congress begins. The final vote for Speaker was 218 votes for Johnson, 215 for Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, and 1 for Representative Tom Emmer of Minnesota. Despite falling short of the initial votes, 2 representatives changed their votes, pushing Johnson into the winning race. Speaker Johnson opened his remarks with a moment of silence in remembrance of the victims from the New Year's Day tragedy in New Orleans.
Time for us to come together, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, to get things done for the people.
Multiple lawmakers on the state and federal level showed support for Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House. Senator Bill Cassidy saying in part, Mike Johnson brings people together to achieve a shared goal. He is deeply committed to conservative values and advancing a pro-America agenda. He is making Louisiana proud. Senate State Representative Chuck Owen, who represents Vernon Parish in the state legislature, wrote this in part, the people of the United States, the people of Louisiana, and the people of the 4th Congressional District are fortunate that our Congressman Mike Johnson has been re-elected as Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, adding, his values are Louisiana's values, and his belief in America first will guide him in all that he does in his role as the leader of the People's House. Another Senate State Rep Darrell Desitel showing support for Johnson. He writes in part, Louisiana has always played a pivotal role on the national stage, and Speaker Johnson's rise underscores the incredible talent and resolve that our state brings to Washington. And Senate State Senator Heather Cloud sharing this in part, Mike is the embodiment of the 5 fundamental values of integrity, honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. This is what Mike Johnson brings to Congress and to the speakership. And Louisiana Representatives Steve Scalise, Julia Letlow, Clay Higgins, and Johnson himself voted to keep the Pelican State Representative in the role. Those who voted for Hakeem Jeffries were new Congressman Cleo Fields and Congressman Troy Carter. Both were Democratic representatives, with Fields representing the new Congressional District 6 in Louisiana. Speaker Mike Johnson's victory means the House of Representatives can move on with their legislative duties. Johnny, back to you.